park over here because this is the carriage house, if I'm reading it right.
Yes.
Okay, so they're going to have events there. They're going to have activities going on there, and you know, and hopefully we're going to be upgrading it and making it you know, a showplace. But the main thing here is that this area here, so you'd be looking like right about here is where it is, which is where the place was where you were running your, you know, you did your little survey during the Bark in the Park, okay?
Here it is, right? That was actually alternative 2.
That was 2.
Yeah, but I would,
That shows it.
yeah, but I'm saying move it over, and I think Sandy is too, move it over to about here, and then this is still, I don't know how much space this is.
It's probably less than an acre. But
Yeah, it's like
Okay,
doable.
okay, but, you know, that should be okay. I mean, I've seen small dog parks, and I've seen dog parks that are just like down in La Entrada, it's just a baseball field. Because they're putting a fence up there and they let the dogs run there when they're not playing the game, which is also an option for us.
Right now it's a tennis court.
Yeah, dog park is, yes. Yeah.
Don't tell them.
Right.
I think that one of the things that we would like to accomplish if the dog park was something considered, we have the largest number of calls for service in there is loose dogs. So if in fact you're leaving it where it is, and I'm going to walk my dog from either one of the parking spots, most likely, if I'm a loose dog person, I'm going to loose dog it until I get to the dog run area, if I'm going to go in there at all. So therefore, we're not reducing the potential calls for complaints, et cetera, by readdressing the location closer to parking. I think we would potentially reduce those calls down because people might be more responsible because they can see the spot that they're going into. So, I mean, I think that would be something important to consider.
Yeah, and you can have opening for small dogs at one end and opening for large dogs at the other end.
Right.
So we still want clarification.
Clarification it is.
The little squares, are those exercise stations?
Yes. Those are the current locations, and they're highlighted just because there would potentially be an upgrade to what is at those locations.
Thank you.
And you're not showing the bridge access to the park, to the one?
This,
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
here. Okay, sorry.
we didn't show that as a change,
Oh,
because that's already there.
Could you clarify what the change is that you're suggesting for the pathway that comes around the tennis courts to the gate?
This,
Yes.
just a formalized
Just
path.
We
to
just
make
agreed
it.
to do that. We
did
agreed to do that.
The council.
Right, right.
Meetings ago.
You're
Yeah.
on
Payment or something.
We're ahead of the
it. You were a yay.
We're ahead
You
of
were
it.
there. You were there.
All for it.
Good.
It's the February meeting.
Any other questions? Elizabeth?
No, just,
Okay.
When you looked at the exercise, did you look at actually expanding the exercise stations and improving them, or just leave them and paint them like we've been doing?
We've talked about introducing, I don't know if you saw in our interview, there's some newer types of equipment for exercise right now. It's really the sit down, sit up, kind of. But there's some newer cycling kinds of where you get a little bit more.
Oh yeah, the Europeans have a lot of those.
So-
They're really good.
Right, so we've talked about introducing some of those as some of the ideas.
So not necessarily more locations, but the potential for doing more at each spot.
Upgrades.
Are you going to go through the results of the survey?
Please.
Or-
We could, yes.
Well, I just had a couple of comments about it. Should we just dive into that?
Sure.
So the results of
Perfect, yeah.
what really stood out for me was the proximity of users, that Atherton users are more than 90% of anybody else. Is that right? Of those surveyed.
Of those surveyed, those are
surveyed.
where the people came from,
Yeah, come from.
the zip code that they were residing in.
Did the survey go to more than just Atherton?
Unless they were at the park.
If they came to the park event,
The people were notified by being at the park that day
I see.
or via the city's website.
I
So
guess-
it's predominantly,
Yeah.
Atherton,
Okay,
right?
I guess my comment is, I've heard over the years that, you know, Atherton residents really are being pushed out of the park and not being able to use the park because of other residents, other jurisdictions, and other people coming in and using the park. And so this chart, to me, belies that. I mean, it says that Atherton, more Atherton people use the park than anybody else.
Well, I don't think that's what that says.
Well, that's what I'm
Which
trying
is
to
more
clarify.
people respond to the survey.
Right,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
just on the basis of
Respondents.
137 respondents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you did go out in Menlo, is that right? And in the
Yes,
almanac?
that, we announced the park tour in those locations, yeah.
Did you offer the survey from those locations?
No, we only
Well,
offered
you
the
couldn't-
survey via the city's website and at the park.
Maybe I
But
could
there
ask
was
a
links on those, in those locations so that they could get to the survey.
clarifying question perhaps to this chart. When you set the survey out, was one of the questions, do you use the park? Or something similar
Yeah.
to that?
Mhm.
So is this only of those that said, yes, I use the park? Or is this
I
of all
think
137?
there weren't anyone, we didn't have anyone that did not use the park.
Yeah, I don't think that was the question. I did ask, initially, the survey did not ask where you were from. And then it got added the following week.
That's
Because I pointed it out to the lady that was there. And said that we would want to have that breakdown. It would have been nice to see the breakdown of the results by Atherton, but most of them were Atherton residents, but.
Yeah, the problem with,
Yes.
surveys like this is that
You always want to cut it differently.
Right.
After you see the results, you say,
Yeah,
yeah,
but
And it's not scientific,
Right.
it's just like having a community meeting where everybody's invited, anybody can show up, anybody can come.
Right.
Right,
So-
right. And the other thing, the frequency of use conflicts, that 3/4 of people said that they never have any conflict of uses, right? Is that the general feeling that you've gotten? That most people, if they want to go to the park and use the park, another big use is not in conflict with them.
well, most of them are using trails.
It was mostly if there's a big event
What do
happening.
you do?
They
Not
use
using like
open
parking.
space,
I think
open
that's trails,
space
and the
and
trails,
trails,
yeah.
yeah. Tennis courts and playsville. And tennis courts are kind of vacant anyway.
No, they're not. I don't know, Mr. Rocher told you, I've seen them now, 5 courts being used,
Five
he
courts.
has too.
Because our new,
Monday morning, 5 hours.
oh my gosh, is that our new key policy?
Do we know where the next closest public dog park is?
Well, on
Oh, those are large.
I have a spreadsheet of all of them if anybody's interested. I had to do a lot
Yeah.
of
Same car.
different columns.
St. Rose.
Yeah, there's several.
Yeah.
You had a comment, you had a couple observations about the online survey. One of the things that really stood out to me, in looking at the survey, was the number of people who walked to the park. And I thought that was pretty significant in terms of, because, in talking to people that day at the park, you're asking, I tried to kind of push people and ask for conflicts. Do you ever have a problem parking? Oh, no, not a problem parking. We asked about dogs in that, we had Steve and I enjoyed talking about the fact early on that off-leash is not allowed. And yet, every time we were there was a significant number of dogs that were off-leash. And people who are walking or walking with their dog frequently, that's a huge point of conflict.
Yeah.
I never heard of anybody really being critical of that. So I think that really goes to the acceptance of that as a real community park, and everybody's very supportive of how it's managed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, my only other comment on the results is the majority of the results said, don't do anything.
Keep it the way it is.
Correct.
Yeah, or give us more open space.
Mhm.
And so.
Well, that was one reason
kind of-
why we didn't want to use any of the existing open space as a dog park. So that's one reason this works or
Well,
this
yeah,
works.
but there is a place where people sit up there, right up there over on the left, where you have that first little hoop, over on the bottom left of the large dog. Oh, okay, fine.
Little red arrow there.
For the exercise
Here.
station.
There you Yeah, fair. There's like a little amphitheater area.
Yeah,
It's not an
there is.
amphitheater, but there's a place where people sit, and
Correct.
it is a quiet little spot. And it could be expanded. But you're right, this area here is all wooded and it's brush, it's small. There are trees, but it's small brush. But this is the same as what's, there are trees and brush here, and then again, as I said, this area here, or this area here, it seemed to be more appropriate for me, because you wanted to keep this off. When people have the caterer come in, I realize this is the premier area, if we can get somebody to rent the pavilion and with what we're gonna do with the event garden and all that stuff, this is gonna be a great area. But there is noise here, and it's one of the concerns with the event garden. There's a playground here, and people make noise, and so, but if people bring in a caterer, oftentimes there's events and it's on this lawn, and that's my only comment, is it is the only place, and the reason they do it here is you get away from this. And so, putting dogs right there, and having the dogs walk across it doesn't seem to fit.
Well, one of the things that I think we pointed out is that there's a need for some pathways, and they don't have to all be paved, they could be a mulch path. But I think connecting that parking lot to that off-leash area under the north lawn has some value. The proximity, you had a good comment, if we put a dog area near the event garden, we could just be no dogs that day.
Yeah.
It could be the same way in the north lawn. I see your point there about that as a special space, because it is one of the quieter spaces in the park. But we'll go back and look at this area where kind of south of the rain garden along the south boundary. Our concern really was we wanted to find a way to level some area for DG, and grading underneath trees is really not a great thing to do for DG, but we'll look at that, at both of those.
Great.
We also heard that there was more concern about these particular trees as opposed to these. Was that a correct assumption?
Most of those are redwoods over.
Like that this was a elm or arboretum,
There's some eucalyptus that are.
and that this was not
Most of
as
those are redwoods.
sacred.
Those are redwood trees. Those are redwood trees.
Along the
On the other side of
On
the
the other
path.
side of the redwoods.
Inside there, there's a couple people planted the Christmas
Like
trees
this
there.
Christmas tree, yes, seriously. Yeah, that's true.
This is a valid option. And
Did they get a permit,
That's
right?
not all the
They
redwoods.
they got a planting permit, right?
I'm planting redwoods.
So that's where we're gonna get our Christmas tree next year.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, you may want to take
We don't
comment
have-
from other
Yeah,
commissioners as well as the.
I'm gonna let Rick next, and then I'll open it up.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, I have one.
Shoot.
As is reflected in our conversation, there's been a huge focus on the off-leash dog area in the whole master plan. I think there are two other things that are really important for the master plan, and I'm not saying we necessarily have to address them here, but I think we should talk about them. One is the facility use. Because the only, in the meeting I was in when we talked about this, the only real facility use that was discussed was the issue of the Knox Play School and the Gilmore House. But I think there's a very important issue for all of us as Atherton residents, which is exactly what do we want the carriage house, main house, and pavilion to be used for. And we need, I believe, a broad strategy for what we'd like these facilities that are our facilities to be used for. And there's a really serious proposal from the Danes to upgrade the carriage house, which sounds like a terrific plan. And I am sure that if we looked at the other facilities, there would be some needed upgrades for them. But it makes no sense for me to dive into that without having an overall strategy for what we want these facilities used for. And it's particularly appropriate to do it this year because we're going to be engaged in building a new civic center. And we want to minimize uses that might be in conflict. We don't want to build extra stuff that we don't. Okay, so that's one comment. The second comment that I feel equally serious about is this park is the crown jewel of our town. And I don't believe that the town has ever, as a town, really invested in the park and in the manner that is deserved by what a really terrific resource it is. In fact, when the park was first donated to the town, it was accepted on the condition that there be an auxiliary organization that get created to fund it. The town never expected to fund it itself. We're now in a different situation. And I think as we look forward, I really want us as a town to engage in thinking about, in a creative way, what can we do with this resource to maximize its value for us as residents. And I recognize that the way that it's currently the most used as a great area to walk in. So I want to preserve that first and foremost. But I also think that there are wonderful areas in this park that could be planted if they would be maintained in a way that we could all feel very proud of. And I mean, I remember several years ago when I was in the Peninsula Camellia Society, and there was a huge donation of camellias that if we had had the ability to put them in, and even more importantly, to maintain them, which I think was concluded we didn't, we could have taken them, and instead they went to Stanford University and to the San Francisco Arboretum. And Frank planted a huge number of rhododendrons that, you know, if they had been cared for, they would do extremely well in this location. Just look at the lowly, it's not that different from this location. So all I'm saying is we have a resource that is a tremendous resource that's never been invested in. And I think over the next, I mean, it's my personal goal over the next 10 years to really try to do something with that. And I think we're all focused on the right thing. We need a head gardener who can sort of lead that effort, because maintenance, it doesn't make sense to put in the time and the money to do the architectural and planting without being able to maintain it. So those are two things that aren't really addressed in this master plan that, in my sort of long-term perspective for what I'd love to see us do with this park, they both need to be addressed. So sort of two more comments. Along that line, one thing that we're doing here, and that I think that your plan has helped with, is to look at the parking and look at the circulation of the cars, and this makes it more organized than it was. You know, we take out the curbs and we make it so there's a couple more places. But one thing we're doing with the Civic Center is we're transforming this parcel from what is effectively a parking lot with a little bit of park to a much nicer location. I would love to see, if we're going to invest in some changes here, at least in the planning. I recognize what the city manager said in terms of the cost, so I'm not looking at this in terms of cost, I'm just thinking about the plan. I'd like to see us be creative with how we manage some of the parking. I mean, aren't there interesting, creative things that we could do with parking that could be held out as, wow, look what Atherton did with its parking in this park, rather than just have, you know, a bunch of parking like we currently have in the Civic Center. So I don't think, you know, I'm not the person to come up with those creative ideas, but I'll bet that there are people that could. Okay, final, smaller comment, going down more, is on the baseball field. My suggestion, I'm sure this is on the website, and we're going to more of this. As we draw more attention to this master plan, we're going to get more people focused on it, which is a good thing. We want that. My recommendation on, and as everybody knows, there's been a lot of controversy about how big this ball field's going to be with the changes that are going to occur as a result of the donation we've received from the Little League donor. The fencing on the ball field is temporary, except for where it goes out to the dugout. So from the dugout out to the end and all around is temporary. I think we should, in the diagrams, show the color, because there's clearly a ball field there, and that includes the grass area. But my recommendation would be to not show the fence, because it's only going to be there for 3 months of the year.
You're talking about this aspect of the.
Yeah, it's a minor issue,
Home
but
run
it's a
fence.
perception issue.
Yeah,
Home run fence.
yeah, not a problem.
Home run fence, right?
The home run fence, but also the fence from the end of the dugout.
Well, it goes from the bullpen area, so it's.
From the
a little bit
bullpen
further
area,
out from the
right.
dugouts, but-
So, the comment is any portion of the fence that's temporary, we
We should
will
show different.
just show a different color rather than fence.
And actually, it's a flexible fence, it's just like what they got out there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will be.
It's just a
That's
little
the
net,
plan.
it's a net.
Catch kids and black balls.
And dogs.
It could be used to hold in the
Any other comments from any council member or committee members? Please.
Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing I wanted to mention was that although there was a significant number of people that wanted a dog park, there was also a significant number that said they wanted more open space. And I think the discussion about the dog park being in the North Meadow conflicts in my mind with people wanting more open space. And it less conflicts if it's back where we just talked about along the fence in the park. It may present some issues with the neighbors, but just that issue with people, a lot of people saying, I want more open space, and then we take out a large portion of the open space of the dog park, I think is a real conflict.
Any other members, please?
I think the comment about the temporary fence is very important for people to understand that it's not going to ever be permanent, because that really closes off a lot of the open space for the park. And is there any consideration for any other sport besides baseball, store soccer, or other things there at all?
We have soccer and lacrosse.
Right.
Are they going to be able to store the goals and have to take them out every practice?
Lacrosse stores their goals up against the fence there, and they use small puck fences. There's not permanent goals.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a multi-sport, complex instead of just a baseball field. They could really tie that in for the whole park for the community.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, I'm Katie Klaus. I'm here today for the Dames. And we wanted to express some concern that BFS wasn't taking into account some of the uses of the buildings moving forward on a master plan. And I've heard some comments today, and I'm glad I came today, because we do plan to renovate and refurbish the carriage house. It's the most important building in the park. And based on what we've seen in some of our neighboring communities, Woodside, for example, we really have seen the potential for the building. It's got a lot of problems right now, as everyone knows. There's a lot of health and safety code issues. It's not up to any building code that I know of, barely, maybe barely. But it has a lot of potential for use by the community, by outside groups, for classes and whatnot. And it is used today for some of that, but we think it could be used more so. And we would like you to consider our plans. Of course, this isn't going to happen overnight, but we do have these plans to move forward. This is going to be our project for the next couple years. And we want you to know that, because that will guide you in your configuration of landscaping and whatnot. And we're talking today about the dog park possibly being to the left of where Play School was. And certainly we wouldn't want to see the dog park right up against the, so close to the carriage house. And we would want to see a little bit of open space there. Open space is not, it's not always the same. Mulch wouldn't be acceptable, for example. We'd want you to know that, because maybe a lawn area or something for some spillover at events at the carriage house would add to the venue's desirability in terms of people using it and renting it for events and whatnot. So that's the project for the Dames for the next couple years. We're just here again to let you know that this is what we want to do, and we hope that you will think about that moving forward with your plans.
Yes, we actually did want to incorporate in, some kind of outdoor space there. I thought that was a really good idea, and also trying to separate a little bit more on the other side, the courtyard from the carriage house.
Right, we have
less
those
industrial on that side.
Right,
It definitely feels very. You have beautiful
close.
Building right next to awful building.
Right, but
and how do you,
we can see that you've taken that into account, and we appreciate that, and we think there's a lot of options there. But earlier you had said, for example, that maybe it could be used for volunteer, space or something like that. But moving forward, we are going to get some, we had plans, but move forward with the capital campaign to pay for the renovation and refurbishment. So that's something that you should know.
Yeah, well, if you have any other further information for us, that you'd like to send us.
We'll definitely get a hold of you and sit down.
Yeah.
and go over
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Yeah, Carrie. Paul Tonelli. I was on the Park Commission for about 8 years. And one of the reasons I got involved was through a friend of mine, Jim Massey, who did 2 different stints on the Park Commission. And this is not in reference to anything particular in the master plan, but a general comment that he made to me years ago that made a lot of sense, that kind of changed the way I look at organizing the park, excuse me, is that if you draw a line down the middle of the park from Middlefield to the train tracks and look at either half, the activity-heavy part of the park borders Felton Gables, and that everything that is planned in the park that involves activity kind of borders on our neighbors, and all the open space is to the other side. So just in reference in how you look at the park and how you meet out the different areas and activities, it's just something to keep in mind, because something that always made sense to me, and we have to consider our neighbors there in Felton Gables as far as putting too many things on that side of the park.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments? Let's bring it back to Leslie.
So I think this is a great exercise and result of, I guess, site planning, if you will. My hope was what was going to come out of this park master plan was not just a site plan or reconfiguration of roads and pathways and a dog park, but more of an overall comprehensive use of the park plan, such as how many sports activities do we have going on throughout the year, and where are they accommodated? How many other special events or organizations line up to use the facilities in the park, and what can we do to enhance the existing facilities to accommodate them at a higher level, as well as maybe even expand it or modify it to make the experience more pleasurable and efficient. And so that component to me is missing from this exercise. It's very easy to get drawn into the minutia of where to put an off-leash dog park, and I think that's kind of something that the residents have been kind of clamoring for, and so it's easy to say, well, that's what we're going to focus on and how to do that. But I really think that more thought needs to be done as to like the tennis courts, how many do we have handball, or do we laying out all the uses of the park and how they can coexist peacefully and flourish in the park. I agree with Vice Mayor DeGoya about the park being our crown jewel, and we really need to invest more in the park as a town. It cannot be self-sustaining as a money-making enterprise. I have said over and over on council the last 6 years that it is an amenity to our residents to the extent that we can support it. The town needs to do that. I don't know any public park that is a money-making, self-sustaining entity. So, but I was just wondering if those concepts about the uses of the park were discussed at the park commission through this.
If I could respond, Joy and I did do a lot of inventory. We haven't really brought that out as documentation, but we will do that in our final report. And the other thing is, we have kind of focus more on kind of the bigger program elements, but in the meantime, Joy kind of had a slide that talked about things that we've observed in the park that are, we've kind of taken as deferred maintenance, but there are some opportunities for kind of enhancing how events there operate. The 2005 master plan talks about a lot of those also.
So
And
was the 2005 master plan a landscape plan, or that was a landscape plan? See, again, that's a landscape plan, that's not a facilities use plan, a park use plan.
Right, but there's a lot of commonality there, and we're going to point that out in our final report. But a lot of those enhancements along the pathways, approaching the buildings, we haven't really punched that out yet. You were just trying to focus on the bigger picture, but definitely the next round of the report, you'll see a lot of those itemized photographs, costs, and a description about why we're making those recommendations.
Okay.
Perfect. Final comments? I'll take that one final comment, because we're going to move on to the next.
Okay. My name is Joanne, and I've lived in Atherton for quite a long time. Did I hear correctly at the outset when you were talking about the plan that you had not planned for any extra parking at this time?
That's correct.
Well, my other thought is if you are planning for a lot of other uses for these buildings and you're adding more facilities, the parking is, I've experienced, is just about okay right now. But if you're planning for more use, then I think you need to think about parking. And your issue of maintenance costs, I think, is really important. And once you get some good idea of what you want to put in terms of plantings and buildings, you need to have a good grasp on what it's going to cost you to hire personnel to maintain that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
No, I just point out on the dog park that when you look at your results, I guess there not quite as many people said that they didn't want a dog park as said that they did when you would go through the results. So I understand that a lot of people want to have a dog park, and as Carrie pointed out, it is one of the biggest quote-unquote violations of having people, the people do run their dogs off leash. So having something, I think, would be a good safety improvement, because a lot of people are afraid of dogs that are walking on the path. They're older people, and the dogs are running loose on the paths as well, and somebody's going to get knocked over one day. So I think we need to have something like that, but it shouldn't be overwhelmingly in size. But anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, to move on to our second item.
Just to kind of wrap that up, Mayor, so council's direction then, at this point, back to the Park and Rec Commission, would be to explore the use of that lower dog park area a little bit more. The findings of the survey and those types of things, we keep moving forward. Those were all done sufficient, and we'll explore some more of those. And because we're obviously off, the Park and Rec Commission's kind of recommendation was to go over on that side, and this has changed over to the middle now. So we'll do some more exploration right into that area.
And when in fact you address the events and stuff, the additional parking issue. If there's
additional parking issues, very good place to sort with.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks.
So thank everybody that attended for that. Thanks.
The main thing is that you come off the driveway, you gotta have that bridge
Well, they could come in the other, they
don't have that in the second. But if you want to use
I know this.
Thanks.
I'll see you Monday, Frank.
All right.
I'll help that.
So in the interest of moving on, for all these that are here for a second meeting, so let's go ahead with the presentation of the draft of the bicycle master plan. Town manager George Rogers. Package in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. You have my report. Although Gordon is here to give a very brief orientation, I know we're quick on time on this one, and then Casey's here as well to make the presentation for discussion.
Okay. We'll do it quickly, although I guess or unless you would like to wait for Councilwoman Lewis.
No, let's go.
We're moving. And actually, this is sort of, I should mention, this has been jointly managed with the city clerk and myself, because it's had a lot of public output and public outreach efforts, so I need to make sure to recognize my partner in this process. And this is both, by the way, this is a work session, although we've got a draft report which you have, but we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of check in with council, solicit your input, and make sure we're on the right track. We initiated this for both bicycle and pedestrian activities. We were fortunate to have a stakeholder advisory group with some interested citizens, not necessarily all residents, in fact, the majority are not residents of Atherton, but they've provided excellent input, and we've also had great leadership with our council liaison, who's been out there bicycling and walking, and that's been very helpful. In fact, the first meeting of the stakeholder advisory group, people got right down and started working with pens and pencils and saying, no, put this over here, and move that over there, and add this over there. So they were really an exciting, vibrant group, and it's been a delight to work with, so much so that the council recently took action to make sure we continue our engagement to look for grant opportunities. The other thing I wanted to mention, because we are doing, as the manager said, so many master plans all at the same time, but we are coordinating. So Casey's been in touch with, talking with the drainage master plan, so that we look, can we put pathways in with decomposed granite and can it be percolating, and look the master plan for the Civic Center, make sure we have pedestrian and bikeway routes through the Civic Center, bikeway through the park, for example. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity that we wanted to take advantage of. So with that, I will turn it over to Casey Hildreth, who is with Alta Planning and Design.